See? Seamless. All right, folks. Welcome to the Wordsligner Reading Hour. There we go. You better want to be here because this is what you chose to do with the next hour of your life. So, I'm Philip Lowe. I am your host, and the way I describe the way this hour goes is this is like speed dating with your new favorite author. You are going to hear readings from not one, but 3 different writers tonight. Afternoon. God, who does shows in the afternoon? We do.
The lights are on. It must be night.
Right? But yeah, so that's the way this works, and unfolding. So yes, my hope is that you walk away from this experience having heard someone you have not heard before. I also encourage you to stick around after the show and talk to any of these people. If they assembled words in a way that resonates with you, you should express that to them and maybe take their books and give them money in exchange, because that's how this works. But I am going to rattle ahead to our first reader. Joan Marie Verba is an autistic author, publisher, and web developer with a bachelor's degree in physics. She was an associate instructor of astronomy for 1 year. She has worked as a computer programmer, web developer, editor, publisher, and social media manager. An experienced writer, she is the author of fiction and nonfiction books, plus numerous short stories and articles. Her novels have received the Mom's Choice Award and the Scribe Award. She is a member of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association and the International Association of Media Tie-In Writers. Please welcome your first author, Joan Marie Verba.
Yes. Okay. I am going to read a condensed version of a short story. The story is called Revenge Denied, and if you want to read the short story, it's 99 cents on Amazon, or you can get it for free by signing up for my email list. And if you want to do that, come to me afterwards. I'll give you my card. It'll have my web address on it, and you can sign up for my email newsletter, which comes out once every 2 weeks, and you can unsubscribe at any time. So here is the story. And I'm also writing a novel, which is a sequel to this. Revenge Denied. Marlis had sunk into a deep, sweet dream of home when hands jerked her out of bed. She struggled to get her footing as the abductors, one on each side, hustled her out the door of the training house. Getting her breath, she shouted, "Help, Elspeth!" But there was no response from within. Outside, she scrambled to keep up with her captors. She realized that these were Elspeth's other apprentice sorcerers, Jana and Kelsey, who she had only met that morning. Both were only 1 year older than Marlis, who was 16. "What are you doing? Where are you taking me?" No answer. By the light of the full moon, Marlis could see they were headed toward the edge of the clearing, toward the woods. Dry branches had been piled next to a wooden post. When they got there, Jana shoved Marlis's back against the post as Kelsey pulled her arms back and tied them with leather thongs. "Why are you doing this? I haven't done anything." Jana and Kelsey only giggled. They stepped away from the post. Jana kindled a sorceress flame and set the branches on fire. Marlis gasped and flinched, straining at her bonds. "What do you want?" "We want to see you burn, of course," Kelsey said blandly. "Help! Help! Elspeth!" Surely the sorcerer could hear. How soundly did she sleep? "Help! Help!" mocked Jana, and Kelsey laughed. "Please, I'll do anything. Just let me go." "We don't want anything from you," Kelsey sneered. Already smoke made Marlis cough. The flames grew each moment. They would reach her legs soon. With an effort, she held her breath and thought. She knew some household spells one had to serve. Blow it out? But all she could do is call up a puff of air, which seemed to fan the flame instead of extinguishing it. Water, but all she could form was dew, which was not enough to douse the fire. Oh, her feet. Oh, her legs. Cut? Cut. The spell nicked the thongs enough for her to twist her hands and break free of the flames. She rolled on the ground. Sitting up, she saw her clothes had not burned, but her feet, her legs. She had spelled a small sphere of light and examined them. Red and blistered only, no black spots, but bad enough. She began to weep from the pain. "Cry, baby, cry," mocked Jana. "Oh, leave the baby to cry," Kelsey said. They walked back to the house. Painfully, limping on her blistered feet, she made her way to the back door. Elspeth stood inside the washroom, a lighted lamp on a shelf beside her. What was all that caterwauling about? Marlis hobbled out of the washroom to the main room and pointed to Jana and Kelsey, across the wide space in their own beds. "They tried to kill me!" "Stop whining at once or I'll send you home." Marlis stood agape. "Do you want to be a sorcerer?" Elspeth demanded. Marlis found her voice. "Yes, that's why I came here, but—" "And you took the oath of an apprentice, saying you would obey me until the high sorcerer determined you were ready to go out in the world as a full sorcerer, no matter what happened?" "Yes, but—" "Then if you're ever going to do anything but those pitiful household spells, you'll learn not to complain about anything that goes on in my household, or I'll release you from your oath and send you home. Do you understand?" She sighed. "Yes, Sorcerer Elspeth." "Very well, then." Elspeth took the lamp and walked past her. Marlis limped to her bed and found her sack, which held all the possessions she had. Those included unguents, which would help with the burns. A pitiful household spell would speed the healing. She settled back into bed, silently weeping into her pillow. She expected her apprenticeship to be hard. Everyone told her that being an apprentice, especially to a sorcerer, was hard, but she did not expect it to be brutal. Was this a test to see if she was resolved? Why had Elspeth, not to mention Jana and Kelsey, who she barely knew, been so cold? In any case, she was not going home. She would show them. In the days that followed, Marlis found that violence seemed to be the way of the sorcerer. With regularity, Jana and Kelsey attacked Marlis in every way imaginable. They dug a hole, threw her in it, and shoveled dirt on top of her. They threw a sack over her, tied it, and tossed her into a river. Each time Marlis had to call on all her resources to get free, and only barely survived. If this was teaching, Marlis felt it was bad teaching. Why not rather show her how to escape such situations first, and then put her to the test? With no allies, and Elspeth showing no concern for her suffering, Marlis often thought of going back home. But she wanted to be able to do what she had seen sorcerers do: heal mortal wounds, repel monsters, banish wildfires. But Elspeth never taught her any of that. The only way Marlis learned anything at all was watching and listening on the quiet days when Elspeth spoke to Jana and Kelsey. It seemed she was allowed to do that because no one protested or prevented her when she did. Although Marlis tried to follow the lessons Elspeth gave to Jana and Kelsey, nothing happened until one day, while walking near a swamp she had not visited before, she slipped into a clutching bog, so called because the mud closed around the victim, sucking the victim to the bottom. After a moment of panic, Marlis calmed herself. She would not sink all at once. She had time, for now only her legs had been encased. Reaching for her knife, she jerked it out of the sheath and stabbed the hard ground, trying to pull herself out. But the knife broke. She reached for a nearby young tree, narrow enough so she could grasp it, but she could only brush it with her fingertips. She tried household magic. Reach, bend, stretch. Yes, stretch. When she cast the spell in her mind, her left leg straightened. She felt a horrible pain as if she had stepped on a long nail. Her leg from her heel to her knee stiffened, and she threw back her head and gasped in agony. At the same time, her body jerked forward slightly out of the bog. Slowly, the bog attempted to pull her in again. This time, Marlis concentrated and mentally pushing the sensation of the needle out. With each effort, the needle seemed to move, and her body correspondingly moved out of the mud. But it was too slow, and the bog continued to claim her. Finally, annoyed and desperate, she surged back at the bog with all her might. She popped out, landing hard on her stomach, clear of the mud. The internal backlash was excruciating. She rolled on the ground, hugging herself. It seemed as if 1,000 needles had jabbed through her heels, her palms, her head. She found she could not even cry out, could not breathe. Breathe! There, her lungs filled with air. The pain subsided. She lay there on her back, spent. After some time, she crawled, then got to her feet and found she was uninjured. Exhausted, she staggered back to the house. After that, mostly in bed at night while the others slept, Marlis tried to recapture the magic she knew had penetrated her at the bog. She found she could pull it in and push it out, through her hands, through her feet. The sensation, sharp at first, never felt so agonizing as the first time, and grew less and less painful with practice, until it did not hurt at all. Out of sight of the others, she put magic into practice. She created wind where there was none. Rabbits came to her against their will. Once out in the forest, she met a bear. She stopped it in its tracks. 4 days later, out hunting, she found the bear still in place. This time, at a safe distance, she released the spell, and the bear sauntered away. Finally, one night, when rain beat against the roof, she slipped out the back door to stand in the yard, and not a drop touched her. She raised her arms and her face to the sky in triumph. One day, she saw Elspeth walk past with Jana and Kelsey. "Why do you always set us at these mundane tasks?" Kelsey complained. "Make the horses go back to the barn, turn the stream to water the garden. I'd rather cause a wildfire to start and then put it out again." "You have to perfect the small tasks before you can attempt the great ones," Elspeth explained. "How about the spell where you can conjure the image of another sorcerer to talk to her at a distance?" Kelsey suggested. "That is one of the more powerful spells," Elspeth said. "Is beyond your present ability." "You might as well ask for the spell for the doorway to the island worlds," Jana told Kelsey. Elspeth nodded. "That is one of the greatest spells. If you could do that, you would be a sorcerer, not an apprentice." "I could try it," Kelsey said. "And if you did," Elspeth answered, "unless you were as skilled as I, you would be sucked into the other world and not come back." Kelsey said nothing, but caught Jana's eye and smiled, then nodded in Marlis's direction. Marlis guessed that meant that as soon as they were trained, they would certainly try that spell on her. If Jana and Kelsey planned to open the doorway and push her in, Marlis knew she had to learn to summon it first. One night, with the full moon shone in the backyard, Marlis slipped out. She stood near the barn and faced the spot where the clearing met the woods. Although she had not been given a specific spell to summon the doorway, she had succeeded in previous spells by picturing the result in her mind and drawing magic in and out of her body. She took a breath, summoned all her strength, and stared resolutely in the direction of the woods and moved her hands as if opening a gate. The maelstrom nearly knocked her down. She had to use magic just to stay in place. Everything near the doorway, however, fell inside, from the fox crossing the yard to the young trees at the edge of the clearing, uprooted and sucked in. Looking ahead of her, she could see what appeared to be a silvery arch, and through it she spied a moonlit meadow. The gale rushed from behind her into the arch, trying to blow her inside. With a gesture, she closed the door. All was still. Marla sucked to the ground and sat there, spent. The back door opened. Jana and Kelsey rushed out. "What was that?" Jana shouted. Elspeth stepped outside. She surveyed the holes in the dirt where the young trees had been, the broken fence around the garden, the grass littered with leaves stripped from the trees. Kelsey pointed at Marlis. "You idiot! Practicing magic without Elspeth directing you? You could have killed us!" Elspeth turned to Jana and Kelsey. "Inside!" With one withering glance toward Marlis, Jana and Kelsey followed Elspeth to the house. In the morning at the breakfast table, Elspeth said simply, "We're going to see High Sorcerer Thorn today." As Marlis cleaned up, Kelsey leaned toward her and hissed, "You're in trouble now!" Marlis did not much care. After breakfast, they dressed in their finest and rode to the castle of the High Sorcerer. Elspeth sped them on their way. When they arrived at the castle, Marlis saw many other coaches ahead of them. Sorcerers alighted and walked inside. Elspeth, Jana, Kelsey, and Marlis followed. They walked through a long corridor with a marble floor and an arched ceiling. At last they reached what seemed to be an audience chamber. A long, narrow rug led to a throne where the High Sorcerer sat. The other sorcerers stood to either side. They seemed to Marlis to be waiting expectantly. Elspeth stopped and waved Jana and Kelsey to the walls where the other apprentices lingered. Marlis and Elspeth stood alone before the High Sorcerer. She stared right at Marlis. "I heard you accomplished something rather remarkable for an apprentice with so little experience." Marlis said nothing. "Answer her," Elspeth whispered in Marlis's ear. "I may have," she said, looking not at Thorn but at the marble floor. "Do you think to reach the rank of sorcerer so quickly?" "I wouldn't presume," Marlis said. Thorn stood. "Come," she said to Marlis. Marlis followed, aware that Elspeth and the other sorcerers and apprentices strolled behind her. They walked through an arch into a huge enclosed courtyard. "Let's see how you do with this," Thorn said. With a gesture, she opened the iron gate, which was at least 20 feet tall, to the outside. In stomped a behemoth with 4 legs, each the thickness of tree trunks, and a sinewy neck, holding a head with long, cruel teeth. Marlis extended her arms. The creature stopped, bellowed with frustration, and slowly turned and stomped away. Marlis made sure the behemoth would continue to walk in that direction at least 2 miles. She closed the iron gate behind it from where she stood. "Very impressive," Thorn said. "Come here, child." Marlis put her arm down and walked forward. Thorn extended her hand. Warily, Marlis took it. With her other hand, Thorn thrust a knife into Marlis's side. Marlis doubled over with pain and astonishment. Blood spilled from the wound. After the first moment of panic, she calmed herself and again caused the magic to flow through her and around the knife. Carefully, she drew it out, and the wound closed. She passed the bloody blade to Thorn, who gave it to the sorcerer next to her. The high sorcerer smiled. "So you are a sorcerer after all." "Marlis?" shouted Jenna and Kelsey aghast. "Silence!" Thorn glared at them. She turned back to Marlis. "Welcome to the ranks of your equals." Marlis then let Thorn hug her, though she did not yield. When the older woman let her go, she said, "Now swear to me that you will never harm another sorcerer, or your life will be forfeit." "I swear I will never harm another sorcerer, or my life will be forfeit," Marlis said, and she felt a tingle, realizing that magic had been used to enforce the oath. "There, the spell is set," Thorn said. "Come, stand beside me at the throne while I formally present you." Marlis followed her and took a place at Thorn's right hand as the older woman sat. She motioned for the assembly to gather around her. When they were quiet, Thorn said, "Join me in welcoming Sorcerer Marlis." "Welcome, well done," the others shouted. Marlis looked at all their smiling faces, spread out her hands, and stopped time around them. All froze in their places. Marlis walked through the assembly and outside to the coach, locking all doors and gates behind her. As she drove away in the coach she had arrived in, speeded by magic with a light heart and eager spirit. All of those pitiful sorcerers and apprentices would stay in Thorn's castle until the day she released them, the day that she returned with all of her own apprentices and sorcerers trained in her way, without malice or cruelty. Which method would convince them then? She would cheerfully wait for that day to come. Thank you.
Oh, it's so long to the stage here. Keep it going for Joan Marie Verba. So I had one quick question I wanted to ask you, and it's a world building question, because I've tried to be better about reading a couple stories by authors for these things I'm hosting. I always buy the books and then I never find time, but so I feel like when you write fantasy, so I'm a Neil Gaiman fan, and he's, to me, it's a master class in doing things that feel logical, even if they're not explained to me. That, it's not like there's any scene where it's laid out where this is what the King of Dreams can do, this is what he can't do, but he does things, and I step back and say, that feels logical. That feels like something the King of Dreams could do. And I read your stories and I feel the same way. There's no exposition scene where it's laid out what sorcery is, but when sorcerers do things, it feels logical to me. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about your approach to world building, to magic systems. Is that something that you think a lot about? Is that how do you resist the temptation to infodump that on an audience?
Yeah, you got to avoid the infodump. That's right. Yeah. Generally, I plot it out in my mind, and I think about, how do I show this? How do I show this without telling? And simply go from there. So, what will demonstrate this? What will demonstrate that? So that's pretty much what I do.
Awesome. That's great. Keep it going for Joan Marie Verba.
Thank you.
And let me go ahead and I want everyone to observe me unfold a piece of paper. This is what you chose to spend your time doing. But our next reader, Paradox Productions, parenthetical, Catherine Hansen, creates supernatural tinged stories that play with expectations. In December, Catherine created the audio play Innkeeping for Blight Christmas 3 podcast. At Convergence 2022, she debuted a new story, The Great Room, for Wordslinger's Way. It was great. I'll throw that out there. She is currently developing some comedy sketches, plays, screenplays, and digital experiences. Please welcome Catherine Hansen.
That was a very epic introduction. Thank you. This is a short story I wrote called Homecoming. A ladybug scrambled toward a flower. It showed no fear as a shadow abruptly fell across it, that of a 6-year-old girl. She bent over it in the sunlight, watching its every move. "Enid!" A man's voice boomed, and the little girl turned her curly head in the direction of her father. She ran across the street to her parents, who were standing outside their 3-bedroom house in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Almost there, Enid stopped suddenly and turned around to see a large shadow moving swiftly toward her. Her father screamed her name once more over the roar of engines. He knew they were coming, but Professor Nathan Crane was doing everything he could to forget about that fact. He went back to weeding the garden. Since this was his least favorite activity, his wife immediately knew the reason. Catherine Crane, who was watching her husband from the side of the house, was around 45 years old. She had a round, sweet face and curly brown hair. She sighed as she carried a laundry basket around to the backyard, her eyes never leaving her husband. Nathan was a tall man with graying hair, and he was handsome, even with wrinkles and lines in his face. Though only around 50, worry made him look older, and he couldn't shake the permanent furrow on his brow no matter how much he tried to distract himself. She studied her husband, then said, "I wish I could get you to do that when I ask." Nathan twisted around, an apologetic smile immediately on his face. "I'm sorry, honey. That's okay." She smiled gently for a moment before her face transformed into a frown. "So they're coming." He nodded gravely. "They'll be here in a few minutes." He let that sink in. "I honestly don't know what to do this time. I've been trying to paint for months, but I've got nothing. I even attempted to photograph the plants. God, I wish I still smoked. Be glad you don't. Our health is the one thing keeping us here. Not for long. I'm afraid this is it, Catherine. We should go inside and pick out what we want to keep." She was quiet for a moment. Her body faltered. "Okay." She turned back and went into the house. Catherine went straight to her favorite spot, her kitchen. She ran her fingers along the smooth mahogany surface of its table. She had been planning what to pack for months, but no matter how prepared she thought she wasn't ready to leave. She picked up a stack of Mother's recipes and leafed through them fondly. Cinnamon rolls, finger sandwiches, mini tortillas perfect for small hands. She stopped and briskly put them in a box. She didn't feel like she was good at much, but Catherine shone in the kitchen. Cooking was her talent. She could turn 3 ingredients into a 5-star dessert. She could make a treasure out of leftover meat and canned goods. God, she missed ground beef. She wondered what kind of food there would be. Separate from his wife, Nathan puttered around his messy studio. There were multiple projects started: a children's treehouse, a family portrait, an anthology of works from college. Back when the rest of the city was populated, Nathan was the go-to advertisement painter. But his passion was painting people. That passion later waned. All their friends who were the same age had been taken. He fought to make sure they all stayed in excellent health and relevant. He made sure he and Catherine jogged around the deserted lake every morning. They used to sit on the bench together and watch the boaters. That they biked around the empty park every evening, past the vacant monkey bars once covered with youngsters. That they walked each day, pretending their neighbors were still in their yards, watering their lawns. It was lonely, but they were still home. Their physical activities reduced as of late. Catherine was always so tired. Every 3 months when they came, Nathan desperately put something together to show them. Past artwork, his awards from the university, articles of Catherine's time as a nurse. She even made a 5-course meal for them once. They were impressed. But now they were running out of options. The rest of the population was going to be moved soon, and they were clearing out the rest of the Midwest cities. Since it was just the 2 of them now, they didn't seem very applicable. Catherine moved on to her bedroom. She opened the bottom drawer of the largest dresser and pulled out 2 stacks of clothes arranged to go. She went through the other drawers for essentials: underclothes, socks. She got to the drawer of random assortments and stopped. Her eyes fell on baby clothes dotted with pastels. She allowed herself 1 second to linger, then closed the drawer. She hastily grabbed their first aid kit. How long did they have? I can't forget the keepsakes from the yard, she thought. Nathan ambled up from the basement. He went outside and put a large duffel bag next to another one Catherine set on the porch. He heard her rummaging in the garage. "Remember to take your favorite watering can with the yellow daisies on it," he called. "I will, but where would we use it?" He paused. "I have no idea." An orange and black cloud appeared in the sky, followed by the sound of a hissing turbine in the distance. Shit, they're early. Nathan frantically looked around. He had planned to take a walk around the neighborhood with his wife, one last time. Now? Catherine rushed out to meet him, carrying a basket of items from the garage. I'm not ready. Emotion overtook her. It will be all right, honey. Nathan held his wife close, trying to hide his anxiety. The hissing grew louder as the aircraft landed on Division Street and moved closer to their block. God, what was going to happen once they boarded? What would they do to this town? Would they be separated? Nathan's mind, stagnant from the last few months, rapidly came alive. This was happening too fast. They weren't prepared. Engines roared. The boxy black ship with jutting appendages edged toward them and halted. The rumbles quieted. Catherine and Nathan stared at the massive vessel glistening in the sun. It looked so odd compared to the rest of their surroundings. And it was different than the smaller crafts they usually sent. Its occupants were changed too. Instead of 2 or 3 unmasked bureaucrats in tan uniforms, 5 soldiers in smooth, pale armor exited, one by one. They stood in a line facing the timid pair. Finally, one flipped up their face shield. Hello, Catherine Nathan Crane. The second soldier, who was holding a metal pad, had a friendly smile. Too friendly. He paused and stepped forward, extending his hand. Nathan carefully shook it. Yes, we are the Cranes of 16th Avenue in St. Cloud, Minnesota, Nathan answered. Catherine watched, not speaking. She started to perspire. Soldier 2 gestured toward the rocket. We are all equipped for you. We want to make this transition as smooth as possible. Soldier 1, who was holding a firearm, flipped over face shield. We need to make this swift and complete. Your cooperation is appreciated. She banged her helmet closed again. Soldier 2 stepped forward, guiding the worried couple. It will all be satisfactory. We will take care of you. Nathan and Catherine wandered forward, gripping onto his arm. She turned her head slightly to glance beside her at the house. Maybe it's better not to look back, honey. She faced once again, and they strode in silence onto the vessel's ramp. She eyed her partner. He smirked reassuringly before they were swallowed up inside. Drone, flash. Drone, flash. Drone. The Cranes were in an elevator flanked by soldiers. It was dark except for flashes between floors. They grasped hands. The trip on the shuttle had been a nightmare. In the suffocating compartment, Catherine had alternated between thrashing sleep and dizziness. Nathan was numb. Everything was opaque. After traveling, they were wordlessly transported into this elevator. They didn't see anything else. Where are they taking us? Catherine barely whispered. Nathan squeezed her hand. Where do we go first? Nathan asked. First stop is intake, Soldier 1's voice responded dispassionately. The elevator slowed. Noises now resonated from between the floors they passed. Trumpeting music, weapons firing, machines, screams, hush. There was enough light now to catch glimpses of the passing windows through the cracks. Nathan squinted. Where were the people, the cities, the planets? There was just sky, stars. Catherine's body wavered. An acute smell seeped into Nathan's nostrils like rotting eggs. Were they trying to poison them? Catherine's grip fell away. Thud. Catherine, Nathan shouted. He reached for her in the dark. Turn on a light. The soldier switched on a flashlight and spoke into the receiver. We have a person down. Call medic immediately. Nathan struggled to rouse his wife. She was unconscious and heated. Vomit bubbled from her mouth. Please, help me, he pleaded. Calm down, sir. We are approaching the nearest level. In a panic, Nathan tried to scrape the greenish bile out of her mouth. No, not her. They can't take her. Catherine didn't budge. The doors opened and soldiers instantly sealed both of them in hazmat suits. They seized Catherine's body and hauled her off down the hall. Catherine, Nathan screamed. They pulled him back, yanking him toward a room. Sir, it's best if you stay still. Catherine! Nathan struggled as they forced him into a stark office and onto a chair. Soldiers swirled around him and their voices became muffled. He couldn't concentrate. Please, let me be with her. Mr. Crane, what has your wife eaten today? Where are they taking her? Has she been exposed to anything in the last 3 days? Have you? No, I need to see her. How are you feeling? Physicians were grabbing him and injecting him with needles. They stuck tests all over him, hooked him up to devices, checked his blood pressure, and scanned his brain. I am fine, he shouted. The soldier, who was the friendly one from before, paused. Please, tell me what is happening. Okay, Mr. Crane, said Soldier 2. I will see what I can do. Nathan chewed his fingernails. He was sitting on a sterile exam table. His face was red and tear-stained. He had waited for hours. They kept giving him assessments. They gave him a little food and water. He gaped at the animated poster on the wall. It showed a cheery cartoon spider describing the effects of disease and how to properly clean to avoid it. He started to hum. It was the song his father always sang to him as a child with his guitar, "When the river meets the sea." He sang it softly. Catherine always loved it when he sang that to her. He started crying again. The store opened and a doctor in a yellow suit entered. "Mr. Crane, I'm Dr. Butler. Do you know anything? Is she okay?" "She's okay for the moment." "Oh, thank God. I can't lose her." "I understand. I've lost everything. I can't lose her." "Mr. Crane, would you please answer some questions for me?" "Why?" "It will help us figure out the situation and the best place to put you." "Fine. Have you ever broken any bones or had major illnesses?" "I had the chicken pox when I was 9 years old. I broke my leg in high school from a skiing accident. I haven't had hospitalizations after that." "Have you ever traveled outside of the United States?" "I studied in England for a college semester. That's where Catherine and I met." The doctor smiled. "Were you adopted?" "No." "Do you or your wife have a history of illness with your families?" Not that I can think of, no." "Has your wife shown any sign of illness in the recent months?" "She's been very worn out lately, and she hasn't been interested in what she used to be. But she's just been nervous about you coming." "I see. Have you or your wife ventured outside of Minnesota within the last 2 years?" "No." "Did you live in St. Cloud your entire life?" "Yes. Don't you know all this already?" "We just need to verify." "Who did you live with inside your home?" "Just my wife. It was just the two of us." "You never had any children?" "No." Dr. Butler entered that information on his pad. "Remarkable." "What?" "In this climate, and given the age of you and your wife and mental states, that you've managed to survive this long and be in such good shape." "Doctor, what is wrong with my wife? Is she going to die?" "No, Mr. Crane." "Your wife is pregnant." "What?" "It's astonishing, but true. Congratulations." What is going to happen to us?" "The committee will review my notes and decide, but I imagine they will have you return to your home, and once your child is ready, join the rest of the residents up here." Nathan comprehended the doctor's words, laughing through his tears. "My child. I always wanted a child. I'm pleased to say that your household's talents and physical accomplishments have earned you a place. I wish you the best in raising your offspring in your house, and I look forward to seeing you when you come back." "Thank you, Doctor." "Enid!" Nathan shouted again. Enid ran to her parents as a boxy craft came closer. "Is that them?" "Yes, honey," Catherine answered. "They're here to pick us up." Enid marveled. She had never seen a spaceship before. She watched as the shiny module with its extremities glided near them and stopped. The hatch slid open. "Hello again," Dr. Butler greeted them. "Hello, Doctor," Nathan answered. "I am pleased to meet you." The doctor knelt down by Enid. "Will I be able to collect more arthropods?" she queried. The doctor laughed. "Yes, you will." "Good." The doctor led them to an elevator. "This will bring you to your new home. Welcome." The three Cranes stepped into the elevator. Catherine studied her husband. The worry lines were gone from his face. He caught her eye and smiled, calm. He put his arm around her, and they in turn put their arms around their daughter. The family faced forward as the doors closed, all of them full of hope.
All right, keep it going for Catherine Hansen. So I have to ask, was your choice of costume in any way related to what you chose to perform, or am I just doing some sort of dark side of the rainbow?
Nope.
Nope.
Not related.
Awesome. Awesome. So I think I've asked you this before, but I'm going to ask again because I feel like it's the one of the most obvious defining things that of the people on the stage, you come from a very strong performance background. Mm-hmm. So when you're sitting down and writing something like this, to what degree are you visualizing yourself delivering this to an audience, and to what degree are you visualizing someone opening this up and looking at it on a page, and how does that affect what you do?
I guess I don't really think about myself performing it as I write it. I kind of try to write it as someone would read it.
Yeah.
And then as I practice them, like, for performances like this, then I maybe add in different voices and gestures. But when I'm writing it, I just kind of think about someone reading it.
So coming at it from the other direction.
Yeah.
As a performer, how do you approach reading something you wrote versus a playwright thrusting something in your hands? Is it the same process, or is this because you're inside of it and you made it? Is it different in some way?
I think it's a different process. I think it's definitely easier because, they're thoughts that I had, and it's, if it's a story I wrote, I'm already picturing what it looks like in my mind and how I see it being said. So yeah, it would be different.
You're not having to wrangle with the possibility of a writer hating the choices you're making, because you are a writer and you already hate the choices that you're making. So.
That's true.
All right, keep it going for Catherine Hansen. We have one more author who I am delighted to share with you. Danith McPherson enjoys snowshoeing, kayaking, and stargazing. That is a bold opening for a writer. That sounds so exhausting for me. In keeping with her Scottish heritage, she is a kilt maker and proudly wears McPherson tartan at Convergence and other SFF conventions. Her novels include the young adult fantasy Blade of Mad Vision, adult fantasy Monarch of Lightning, and mystery Averted Vision. Her short stories have appeared in the year's Best Fantasy and Horror, Asimov's science fiction magazine, Amazing Stories, and other places. Do you need other places? That's pretty impressive already. Some of them are collected in Roar at the Universe. A second collection, Through the Wall, will be out soon. She is a member of SFWA. Please welcome Danith McPherson.
Thank you. I'm going to read from Blade of Mad Vision, from this one. And a couple of things that you need to know before I get into this is that one of the main characters, Austin, has been taken to another planet where he hopes to rescue his sister Skylar, who has been kidnapped. And both Skylar and Austin are fencers, modern day type fencers. And he gets to this planet, and they have a version of fencing called Nixon Jabs that is done in the round, in 360, and that's difficult for him since he's used to fencing on a fencing strip. And so Po Leon Ko, who is the person who brought him to the planet, has come up with a scheme, and this is Austin having to deal with what Po came up with so that they can earn some money. Austin found himself standing on the end of a wobbly ramp, tilted up to a plank, stretched across a very smelly animal sty, complete with animals. The round beast waddled about on short legs. Similar to hog-like creatures on Callister, the Vibbies were uglier and smelled worse, sort of a blend of feces, urine, and rotting eggs. This wasn't what Austin envisioned when Po said he had a way to finance their trip to rescue Skylar. After the Nixon Jabs bout with Reister, Austin had complained to Po about the difficulty of facing an opponent experienced in moving around in any direction. Po had been fascinated by his description of a regulation fencing strip and the idea of restricting movements to a long, narrow rectangle. Much too fascinated, Austin realized. While Austin had spent a long, uncomfortable time in the claustrophobic room with the girl who was not his sister, Po had been out arranging this strange competition. The girl Cabral had sat at the rough table, keeping her eyes on a bowl of fishy chowder, slurped with a wooden spoon. Is Skylar okay? Austin had asked. Cabral had said, not looking at him. She is protected. Protected? That didn't mean safe, and that wasn't the intent of the question. Austin was asking in a larger sense, asking across the chasm of the 2 years his sister had been gone. Was she healthy? Did she miss him and their parents? Did she think about him, talk about him? Had she gotten taller, fatter, thinner? Did she still crinkle her eyes shut when she laughed really hard? Did she laugh here? Or was she sad and homesick all the time? Austin made a few stumbling attempts to get the details he craved, but Caprill's replies were short and unsatisfying. Poe had broken the prickly silence, charging in excited as a child by his new enterprise. Without explanation, he had Austin grab his weapon, and they'd rushed out to the livery stock yard. Now Austin eyed the ramp and the long, sagging plank supported at each end by the corral encompassing the beastie pit. Shopkeepers, farmers, and general citizenry all carried swords, forming a line and a similar incline on the other side. The first one tottered his way up to the edge. Magnificent, Poe said, referring to his own idea. A plate and 5 gills to go. 6 opponents. Soon you'll have additional braids, and we will be traveling like lords. A quiet horror crept over Austin. 6, he said. 6 bouts while standing on a board? Only to 3 points, Poe said. He directed Austin's sight along the makeshift bridge spanning the sty. See, it is your fencing strip, just as you described. You will have all the advantage. Austin wrinkled his nose at an especially strong whiff from the mire. It's supposed to be on the ground, he said, not suspended in air. If you step out of bounds, you don't fall into... Austin choked. He didn't want to think about the composition of the earthly muck. Poe was giddy with pride. This is the genius of my design, he said. Fall and lose. They have not stripped before. You have. They will fall. You will not. No one will last to 3 points. What if I fall? Austin asked. Poe sobered. Then we must award the winner 10 guineas, double what they are paying for the privilege of being beaten by you. I hope that will not happen. There is a capital investment in renting the location and procuring referees. 2 such catastrophes would devour our margin. A 4th would place us in serious trouble. There is no tolerance for unpaid debt here. He brushed aside the possible doom with a wave of a hand and continued, do not dwell on that, nor on the slop below you. Concentrate on preserving our earnings so that we may continue to eat and perhaps attain a pack animal. Not having to carry gear all the way to wherever it was they were going and having regular meals sounded great to Austin. He would love to focus on that, but Poe had told him not to think about falling into the foul mud and owing his opponent's money, so naturally that filled his mind. Poe hurried to the other side to manage the opponents. Austin trudged up the ramp and cautiously inched onto the plank. Cabral had disappeared. From the advantage of height, he scanned the stockyard but didn't see her. She was probably off somewhere retching up chowder from the nauseating smell. Austin flicked his weapon and tested the footing. The wood groaned and shivered under him. He tried to imagine he stood on a ribbon etched in the dirt in the arena back home. Flat land surrounded him, he told himself. Safe, flat land. He could almost see it, almost believe it, except for the smell and the quivering of the board and the squealing of animals below his feet. Austin let go of the illusion. He was stuck in this precarious reality and would have to deal with it. The 3 referees stood outside the pit on barrels that elevated them to the level of the fencers. From habit, Austin gave each one a salute, bringing his blade to his forehead, then unfurling it downward. He did the same to his first opponent. Saluting was not part of the custom here. The round man grunted as he tentatively shuffled forward. The plank sagged, recovered, and sagged at each step. Awkwardly, he returned Austin's gesture with his inelegant broadsword wrapped in a bark skin. Play, the main referee called. The The round man made a wide swing with his hefty weapon, testing the range. The board wobbled with the redistribution of weight. Surprised, the man waved his arms, trying to adjust. He tilted to the left, sticking out his right leg to counterbalance. Grinning with relief, he successfully centered his bulk over his supporting leg. He tried to set his right foot on the narrow plank and missed. Crying out in disbelief and dread, he toppled into the muck with a wet splat. Released from its burden, the board vibrated wildly. Austin bent his knees to absorb the flux, more like a surfer than a fencer. The spectators thought it was great sport, even though no contact had occurred. They roared with surprise, delight, and disappointment. A referee pointed to Austin and called winner. Two of the waiting competitors demanded that Poe return their 5 gills. Other spectators shoved coins at Poe and rushed to the end of the line. Austin counted, including the defeated man climbing over the rails of the corral, dripping in assorted shades of runny brown sludge. There were 8. The next one, a woman with many braids and just as many tufts of short hair, took 2 confident steps onto the board. Austin took a deep breath of foul air and saluted her. A referee called play. The cost of the animal and livery, a bit of grain to supplement the beast grazing, a small fee to the livestock merchant for the use of the sty. Poe ticked off the expenses as the travelers swayed from side to side with the stride of their new plottle. Our earnings were quickly depleted, but well spent. At the next village, we will gain even more for several meals. The saddle had 2 seats on each side. They were little more than leather slings suspended from yokes across the animal's wide back. Austin sat on the opposite side from Cabral and Poe, unable to see. He kept a hand against the rough hide to ease bumping against the ribs with each sway. "You want me to do that again?" Austin shouted. He'd gotten through a total of 12 challengers without losing his footing. None of them had scored more than a single point. Only 2 had taken all 3 hits to defeat. Most had fallen into the pit because of their own mistakes. "You did splendidly," Poe said. "With no doubt you will defeat all whom you face." He steered using reins that looped across the plottle's head and thick neck. The beast needed little guidance on the well-worn road. "My family is grateful for the educational opportunity you and your sister provide," Poe said. "The English lexicon I'm compiling continues to flower with the buds that blossom from your lips. But alas, knowledge of your language produces no income at the moment and may never do so. Fortunately, we now have an immediate way to benefit from our partnership. And so we have this fine beast to speed us on our way." Austin heard him slap the animal's grooved hide. Trees, grasses, and farm fields crawled past. Austin wasn't seeing much speed exactly, but the animal ambled faster than Poe could walk on his short legs. The plottle suddenly tripped, slamming Austin against its solid side, despite his effort to cushion the impact. "I could teach Cabral to fence on a strip," Austin said. "Then we can take turns sty fencing, or whatever you call it." Silence was followed by the rustling of Poe and Cabral whispering intensely. They did that a lot, excluding Austin from discussions that often seemed more like arguments. He was sure Cabral protested. Who would volunteer for such a bizarre and smelly sport? She hadn't been anywhere in sight while he'd faced a dozen grinning maniacs with heavy blades. Austin noticed the whispers becoming quieter, silk against silk. Poe, the master negotiator, was making his case. "That is an idea worthy of consideration," Poe shouted from the other side of the animal. "Perhaps a lesson or 2 to determine if Cabral has the aptitude for it." "Right." Austin knew he'd be stuck doing all of it himself. At least he liked his braids and would be glad to get more. Oh, you earn braids by winning fencing bouts. "My friend," Poe called, "you suggested we need a name for our new sport." "You are most correct. Since it is on a strip of wood, I propose we call it stripping." Poe decided to call the new sport cat jabs. At the next village, Austin won a match against a guy who backed up every time he attacked. Finally, the guy fell backwards off the far end of the plank, defeating himself. They hadn't all been that easy, and more stood in line, waiting for their turn. Poe puffed up to him, out of breath. "We're getting close to the Honorable Lord Cricken's land," he said in a low voice. He tilted his head toward 3 figures in impressive black, red, and gold uniforms sauntering toward them. "That lot belongs to his lordship's guard," Poe said. "We would be wise to avoid their scrutiny." "Are they the ones who kidnapped Schuyler?" Austin wondered. "Have they patrolled outside her prison cell?" He wanted to smack them into the muck. "Finish up the rest and we'll be on our way." Poe scurried back to the other side of the corral before Austin could complain. "Finish them up." Poe made it sound simple. Austin's muscles ached. Covered in slime, he stunk so bad he could barely stand it. Some of the sorters had obviously been practicing, eroding his advantage. 5 of the bouts had gone to the full 3 points. Twice, a blow had dumped him into the pit. Going from a stool to a box to the barrel, Austin climbed up onto the plank. To give his sword arm a rest, he experimented with different moves. If he shuffled his feet and leaned to one side, pretending to step in that direction, even though it was impossible on the narrow board, his opponent took a counterstep out of habit from years of circling in nicks and jabs. It worked on the next opponent, splush, and the next, splush. He ripped through a string of challengers with a combination of honestly scored points and his new trick. Maybe he could finish this up and make Poe happy. A figure in black, red, and gold stepped onto the sagging board, one of Lord Cricken's guards. Austin's muscles clenched. So much for avoiding scrutiny. The woman's pale braids, with no stubs, showing she had not lost in years, were pinned high up on her head. A polished hilt rested lightly in her hand. Austin could sense the balance in it from the way she rolled her wrist in a practice stroke. The rest of the serious weapon was cloaked in a smooth-fitting skin that must have been custom-stitched for this specific sword. Austin had gotten used to heavy blades designed more for hacking firewood than sorting. They were like bulky plow horses compared to the guard's thoroughbred. The woman bent her knees and dropped into a starting position, just like the one Austin had tried to teach Cabral. She attacked quickly, as graceful as her weapon. Her elegant motion surprised Austin, then surprised him again. It had been a long time since he'd faced a skilled opponent. In the past, he would have been excited by the challenge. Now he was embarrassed by his inability to defend himself. His training had been comfortable and routine for far too long. He could blame it on not having Schuyler to practice with, but the truth was he had gotten lazy. 1 point away from being defeated 3-0, Austin felt desperate. Ashamed at using a trick on someone of her skill, he made a feint to the right. Disciplined, the woman held her line like a seasoned fencer. She lunged. Austin felt the delicate strike as if it were a punch. Point number 3. The referees declared the woman the winner. Another uniform forced him with the same sword and the same style. Determined to redeem himself, he scored against the man, but still lost the bout. He fought the third black, red, and gold combatant to a 2-point tie, but couldn't get past the man's defenses and lost again. Austin ruffled the short spots in his hair where braids had been and watched the 3 guards swagger away laughing. Not just skilled, not just well practiced, they were trained in fencing on a strip. He was too exhausted to think about it, and Poe probably wasn't pleased with the tally. Austin's vision of soaking away his aches in a steamy bathhouse while his clothes were being properly laundered was fading. When he finished, he'd be bathing in the old river and washing his own reeking clothes. The last sorter inched onto the board. The wood groaned, protesting the red-haired man's considerable weight. "You've quite a crop since I saw you last," the man called across the Vibby sty, his voice like tumbling boulders. "But there's also been a harvest." Austin flushed at Reister Brembrock's reference to his missing braids. "I suppose you want your plate back," Austin said. Thanks to Poe's lessons, he was gaining confidence speaking Linwick. "There's a bit of that," Reister said, inching closer to the middle. He held his massive sword ready to attack. The board trembled with each shuffle. Suddenly, he flipped his weapon and snatched it in the fist of his other hand. Then he planted the tip into the wood. He held onto it for stability and gave a tentative bounce. The vibration forced Austin to fling out his arms like a tightrope walker. More of it being, Reister said. I only have to pitch you into the fragrant soup to put 5 new gillies in my pouch. He gave another bounce. Austin flailed but kept centered. Not a very sporting approach, he said. Reister grinned and said, you're the one who invented this chancy game, or so's I hear. Can't blame a guy for trying a different way of it. Noticed you have your own special clevers. Already embarrassed, Austin lunged, his foil aimed at Reister's ample chest. Sword stuck in the board and useless for defense, the man jumped back, harder than intended. Released from the considerable weight, the plank sprang up, lifting off the corral rails, supporting it at each end. Reister's descending bulk slammed into it midair. It bowed toward the mire, then snapped back, sending both occupants flying. Austin managed to land on it with his feet under him. Reister swiped at his sword to steady himself, but instead jerked it from the wood. The plank bent deeper, almost touching the slop. Austin stumbled forward into the downward curve. The board rebounded, launching the 2 fences even higher. Almost nose to nose, they dropped their weapons and clutched each other's shoulders. Ah, they yelled. Together they smacked against the center of the strip. A thunderous crack tore the air as the wood splattered. Austin felt his stomach jolt into his throat. Splush! Shock silenced the crowd. Stretched out in the foul soup, Austin was too drained to move, but strongly motivated by the stench and the fat vibbies poking at him to see if he might be food. Coated with putrid mud, he struggled to his feet. Reister sat up, looking dazed. Assured that both competitors were unharmed, the crowd erupted in deafening laughter, scaring away the snorting vibbies. Austin found his foil and staggered to the rails. He tried to wipe gross filth from his face with dripping hands. His muscles refused to work properly. He could barely grasp the post. The big man grabbed him from behind and tossed him out of the pen as if he were a rag. Reister climbed out and shook himself like a wet animal. Soaring clods pelted the crowd, causing a rain of shrieks and curses. He gave Austin a slap on the back and said, I'll be trying a different way of it next time.
All right, let's keep it going for Danith McPherson. And let's keep it going for all of your readers this afternoon. I hope that you heard something that stimulated your interest or imagination. Once again, I urge you to stick around for a couple of minutes and express to these authors any response you may have had. They will probably sell a book to you if you offer them money. I'm just letting you know that's a thing that's likely to happen. But otherwise, thank you all so much for coming out and spending a part of your Friday afternoon taking in words. We have a completely full booking of lots more opportunities for this kind of thing this weekend. I hope you had a good time and that we'll see you back here again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.